Listen, good afternoon. I want to be sure to start us off because we have a lot of things to do to talk about today and not a lot of time to occupy this space, which is always important. For those of you who don't know, I am Representative Dan Miller. I am the Majority Whip in Harrisburg, and I'm a former public defender in Allegheny County. We're here today because we're going to be talking about the state of indigent defense in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot to discuss. We're going to be joined, I hope, by my friend Representative Kincaid as well, who's a member of the House Judiciary Committee, where I spent, 8 years, I think, when I was a rank and file member of the House. Indigent defense, it's kind of funny. My first job in law school was actually with the ACLU, where I worked on a case that had to do with, I guess I'll just say, gouging a phone, collect calls from a prison in Virginia, actually. That kind of was sort of my entry point that led me to the Public Defender's Office in Allegheny County, where we talked about what it's like to represent the constitutional rights of those who can't afford to have a private or paid attorney, and the significance in doing so, and what that meant. Hey, I'm coming up. What that meant to the system. I always say to people, yeah, just come on up here. This is Emily. She'll be right here. The reality of it is the scales are there for a reason. In order for the scales to work, though, in that balanced scenario, it requires two parts to be funded appropriately. Thankfully, and we are obviously we want both parts to work, but thankfully we know that the prosecution side generally does not have the same challenges that come up for financing. That's not to say that they are not funded appropriately or that they are. There are still issues that should be addressed. We know on probation, juvenile probation, a bunch of the system still requires funding for things to work correctly. But I also know that the public defender side, the indigent defense side, is one where the struggle tends to be greater. I was hired in Allegheny County in 2002 because the ACLU sued Allegheny County. And they sued Allegheny County because we were not funding the Public Defender's Office appropriately at the time. So me and 8 others were brought in. I think it was the largest hire at the time for Allegheny County. And we were there to try and, let's just say, buttress some of the good work that was being done, but that was not being supported across the way. I never forgot my conversations with the attorneys who were there during that period and waiting for the effects of that consent decree to have an impact, because they knew what it was like to walk into city court and have 67 cases handed to them, or what it was like to not have support staff that would be able to help them file motions. And some of the work that we're going to be talking about that thankfully Allegheny County is dealing with now, these were pipe dreams to us 20 years ago. The need was still there, but the system was not able to match it. Allegheny County now is generally, we're going to hear some more about it. It's generally better than many counties, and that's a good thing. But it's still not where it needs to be, and largely that's because the state plays no role in funding it. So unlike many states, we require Allegheny County to have a public defender's office to enforce state law largely with state judges largely, and then we don't fund any part of their work. And so we pass that on to the counties and say, good luck. And so we then take into that political equation this system. And we tell those county executives or those county governments that they have to figure out how to fund those services. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but not many counties is there a massive outcry by the public where they say, you know what we got to do? Please raise my taxes to fund the indigent defense services. If anybody knows a county that does that, please do let me know. Right. But I'm unaware of that population that is really pushing for that to occur. So what happens? Well, some counties struggle and do their best to keep a level of service and hopefully grow it from there to match all the needs, the legal needs of their clients. And keep in mind, we're talking about the constitutional rights of people. We're not just talking about, hey, look, did somebody have access to their fantasy football league on an internet page? These are constitutional rights in a court to which has massive role or impact on their lives and future. Often to which, by the way, it's a whole nother issue about whether or not people understand the rights that they give up during the process, but I'll save that for another discussion. But those are the challenges that we have. So some counties try to meet them. Some counties exceed them. Most counties in Pennsylvania do not. despite the best efforts, most counties struggle to meet standards that are pretty well established nationwide. And that's what we're going to be talking about here, because thankfully, Governor Shapiro and Lieutenant Governor Davis has started us on a conversation of reassessing the state's role in assuring that no matter what county you're in, your constitutional rights still carry the same value. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So my staff gave me a mic because they know I hate to sit for so long, but I will go up there. I want to also recognize Representative Kincaid. I want to thank her very much for joining us. Em has been a longstanding member of the House Judiciary Committee, I think, since you've been elected. And while I come up there, Em, I just want you to introduce yourself and just let people know what brought you in today.
Sure. I'm Emily Kincaid. I represent the 20th District, which includes parts of the city of Pittsburgh, as well as some of the northern suburbs like Ross Township area. I am an attorney, and I did criminal defense work before I was elected. So, this is something that I've been working on since I was elected, in terms of just, being able to make sure that our adversarial system actually works the way that it was intended to. Our county executive is here, and I kind of find it interesting because I got a comment from folks about the proposed county tax increase that highlighted, well, we spend $20 million on the county police, and we spend $20 million on the district attorney's office, and we spend $10 million on the public defender's office. And I was like, well, you're so close to getting it. But, I think that that's really, that's the issue. We are spending half as much money on the defense side as we do on the prosecution side, and yet we are expecting that our indigent defendants are going to get the same kind of advocacy as the Commonwealth does. So, we really need to make sure that we are, talking about this, and I appreciate this conversation about the state of indigent defense in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Em. I'm going to invite, of course, our two speakers to join us today. This first, obviously, is County Executive Sarah Innamorato. I asked Sarah to join us up here. She's also joined by her Chief Public Defender, Lena Henderson, who I did have the privilege of serving with for a period of time when I was a public defender here. And County Executive, we want to thank you for joining us today. We want to thank you also for your advocacy in these arenas. We do remember all your hard work in pushing for a variety of services. So thank you, and it's so great to have you here to join us today to talk about indigent defense.
Great. Thank you, Representative Miller, and thank you, Representative Kincaid, for being here. I think this is my first time sitting in this seat specifically. Normally I'm up there or at the podium. Rep. Miller, I know that you and I started our friendship when we had a forum that was hosted by the ACLU, when I brought up the point that Pennsylvania is one of the only states that doesn't fund public defense, and that kind of kicked off our connection in this work in this space. So I'm proud to be able to continue it as county executive and take the work that we worked on collaboratively at the State House and apply it to my role as executive. I first want to thank the Allegheny County Public Defender's Office, Chief Lena Brian Henderson does an incredible job leading a committed group of county employees who care deeply about justice and making sure that every single one of our neighbors have the representation that they deserve. But it is really hard. It is really hard when we don't have the proper investment from the state, and we have to fund not only the public defender's office, but the entire criminal legal system within the county on the backs of taxpayers here, with limited help from our state partners. So, it's our constitutional obligation that we provide this type of defense, a high-quality defense, to our neighbors, and strive for equal treatment in our criminal legal system. And it is taking a toll on our workforce. without this adequate support, the burden falls on our public defender's office. In 2024, we have started to collect data over the last couple years. In 2024, their caseload is 3 times the recommended standards set forth in the National RAND study about public defenders. 3 times. You can imagine what that does, not only for the service that clients are getting that are coming through the public defender's office, but the toll it takes on our public workforce to have to deal with that immense caseload. But by investing in our public defenders, we invest in more effective representation for our neighbors most in need, ensuring that we protect rights guaranteed to all and meaningfully build equity within our criminal justice system. And I want to go through some statistics and kind of lay it out about what's happening in our public defender's office here in Allegheny County. So far in 2024, which we're not through yet, our Allegheny County Public Defender's Office has handled over 12,000 criminal cases opened at a magisterial district level. And about 80% of our criminal caseload is at the magistrate level. They have handled 3,100 criminal cases in the Court of Common Pleas at the trial level. And that's about 64% of the county's criminal caseload in the entire Court of Common Pleas. They have had 243 major felony cases assigned to them and 4 capital cases, which are immensely resource intensive. In addition, they've had more than 3,421 mental health commitment proceedings, more than 861 magisterial expungements granted, and more than 176 common pleas expungements filed. And that is not even an exhaustive list of everything that they are tasked with doing, both in legal defense, but also in being good partners with the community and ensuring that people can access opportunity and clear their records. And Representative Kincaid, I appreciate you bringing up the budget that I proposed last week, though it kind of feels like it's been a month or 2 ago. But it's so important that we are investing in the people who are delivering justice for the least among us. And part of that increase is helping to achieve a strategic vision that has been laid out by our Public Defender's Office on how we can start to achieve parity and balance between the prosecution side and the public defense side. And I'm here to say that we just can't continue to bear that burden alone. Representative Miller, to your point, we appreciate the Shapiro administration really thinking about how we begin the conversation about what it means to invest in indigent defense throughout the Commonwealth. I sit on the advisory board, and I'm grateful to have that appointment from the governor to serve on that board, and have learned a lot about the different models that exist in different states and how states like Michigan have gone from not funding at all to being able to ramp up and provide the majority of funding for their county level public defense. But, there's this amount of money, it's great, and we are putting it to good use, but it is funding a portion of a person's time and really not chipping away at that disproportionate caseload that our public defenders have to face each and every day. But I think the other point that I want to make is a point to the broader community, because we often don't hear about indigent defense from people who don't work in the criminal legal system in some capacity, whether that's a social worker, whether that's a lawyer, or a public defender. We should care about this as the general public, because if we aren't providing proper defense on the front end, if we don't have our public defenders available 24/7, we have people who are churning through the criminal legal system. And one of the major drivers of cost in Allegheny County is our jail. And if we are unnecessarily having people who are picked up because of petty theft or things that are non-violent offenses, and they're having, because they don't have any representation at that moment on intake, they're going into our county facility. And not only can that destroy that individual's life on the back end, where they might lose a job, that means they lose a paycheck, that means they can't afford rent any longer, that means that they can't be the best possible neighbor and community member in our society. So we're not only setting them up for putting them into a hole, but we're also needlessly spending taxpayer dollars to put that person in a system that's just breaking them and not delivering public safety on the back end. So you're actually making people less safe, you're eroding community connections, and you're spending money that you don't need to spend and is so much better used on the front end, like funding our public defenders, like funding our infrastructure and our parks and our bridges, because this all comes from the same pot of money for the county. So I just want to also make that point as someone who, is responsible for 20 departments within the county, that this is all interconnected. And, that's why we're so grateful that you are here today to hear about the enormous challenges in ensuring that our most vulnerable neighbors receive the defense that they are truly entitled to. And that, just to reiterate, this small fraction of state funding hardly makes a dent when it comes to the pressures faced daily by our public defenders. And it, we really need help to balance our books to provide a variety of services that are needed by our residents that extend far beyond the criminal legal system. So investing in public defense at a state level isn't just about investing in our counties, it's about investing in an essential service, it's about investing in our communities, and it's about honoring our commitment to this country by achieving justice for all. So thank you, and I want to pass it over to our Chief Public Defender.
Good morning. I'm used to sitting on that side, which would be the defense. First of all, I want to thank Executive Sarah Innamorato for putting the focus and attention on what the Public Defender's Office needs, because historically we have been ignored. And so the fact that we're sitting here in front of two representatives and an executive is historical. I hope that it becomes the attention for other people to see that we need this funding. Sarah talked about numbers and statistics, but what I want to point out is humans are behind these numbers. The investment in the Public Defender's Office is investing in humans that will equal generational wealth individually and generational wealth in the community. She touched upon the ripple effects that may occur. And I want to hone in on the specifics. So right now, if someone gets arrested, it's a crapshoot as to whether they are represented at a critical stage, which is arraignment. We have attorneys that are in arraignment from 8 to 11, Monday through Friday. So in city court. So it's where you get arrested and what time you get arrested, which determines whether you're represented at a critical stage. That critical stage is a magistrate determines whether you get bond. If you are denied bond, then we know what can happen. You can lose your job, your child could be put into custody, numerous things could happen. The fact that we have someone at those critical stages statistically shows that the outcome is much better. The jail population is reduced, and all those human things that can happen detrimentally to someone doesn't. The next step is preliminary hearing. Right now, we don't have enough attorneys to communicate with their clients prior to that step. And so the client comes in, and although we have these talented, committed attorneys, they don't have enough time to talk with the clients prior to coming to court. So that client meets their attorney on the day of a critical point, which is a preliminary hearing. And the magistrate, as you both know, determines whether the case is held for court. We go to the next step, which is formal arraignment pretrial conference, the same thing. The attorneys at trial don't have enough time to talk with the client prior to those stages. So that creates a distrust with the client. Although, again, we have the best attorneys, we get to trial. Who wants an attorney that wasn't there from the first step to this step? And then we get the reputation of being people who plea and their clients and not representing their clients well. So funding in a public defender's office is critical from the standpoint of making sure that every human being is getting what the Constitution entitles, but it's also giving the community of people who we serve the assurance that we think that they deserve what the best representation. And we're nowhere near giving them that. Our office put together a proposal for Sarah and her team, and we walked through someone who would go through the system as it is now. And then we put together what it would look like if the system was reimagined, if we invest in these humans. And it's just a tremendous difference, because they would have a representation at every stage. They would have representation that is well strategized, well communicated, and if that occurs, then we then have people in the community who can get jobs, who can get loans, who can buy houses and pay property taxes. So,
And, you know, and so thank you. First, I I knew you as Lena Henderson. I apologize. I didn't say Brian Henderson, so my fault.
That's okay. My father would be upset.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. I also know that I promised the county executive I'd be mindful of her time. And so I want to, first, Lena, when you have a chance, I'd love to actually see what you, if it's possible, to go over what you had envisioned to maybe help us have a better idea as well as to how we can perhaps help
I
the
brought
counties.
copies for you.
Excellent. So we'd love to go over that at some point, maybe in another discussion too. But look, obviously with it, I want to thank County Executive Innamorato for coming here today. And like she mentioned with it, I knew that this was a passion issue regarding her not only legislative work, but her role as a county executive with what needs to be done. And this is why we're here. We want to be talking about how the state should be doing a bit more to help the counties. I know you mentioned the county jail. I didn't even realize until this previous year that the state pays nothing into the county for the county jail operations at all. So much gets passed on, and in that passed on mentality, we also see great disparities between counties when it comes to abilities, even in the best of intention, to safeguard rights and care for people in an appropriate way. So I believe the state has to do better. But we very much thank you both for joining us today. And I know we went a little bit over to your time, but thank you for making the extra time as well.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you, Ms. Brian Henderson, as well. We'll look forward to talking to you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so next up, we're very glad to have Sarah Jacobson. Sarah is the Executive Director of the Public Defender Association, amongst many hats, I think, that she does. She was appointed by Governor Shapiro to chair the Pennsylvania's Indigent Defense Advisory Committee. She previously served as the Director of Trial Advocacy and as an Associate Professor at Temple Law, which I think some people were cheering for. And before that was an Assistant Public Defender at the Defenders Association of Philadelphia. So, Sarah, thank you for joining us. I know we talk often, but we very much appreciate. Do you have a, who does the show? No,
I don't have a PowerPoint.
You don't need the PowerPoint.
Just
She's
get
that good. She's like, I don't need.
You just get me.
Sarah, take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. As Representative Miller said, my name is Sarah Jacobson. I'm here as the Executive Director of the Public Defender Association of Pennsylvania, PDAP. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak today, and grateful for the leadership you're both showing and being here, and grateful for the leadership that Governor Shapiro has shown in this field. And this is something he ran on, right, and put in his first budget address and second budget address, and has delivered $7.5 million in the last budget, $7.5 million in this budget. Of course, that couldn't happen without the help from you all and other folks like Speaker McClinton, Representative Napoleon Nelson, Senator Vincent Hughes. Grateful for all of that support. But the reality is that much more is going to be needed over many more years to level the playing field. When I say the playing field isn't level, I first start with the numbers. Since 1997, Pennsylvania has paid over $180 million to county prosecutors in salary support alone. So not other grants, nothing else, salary support alone. In 2022, the last administration gave law enforcement and county prosecutors $170 million that year alone for community safety. I think about the individual counties and what the counties are capable of, since most of this burden falls to the counties. Here in Allegheny County, the prosecutors are funded at $10 million more than, it's a little over $10 million more than the public defenders are. The public defenders are funded at 56% of what the prosecutors get. You're going to hear from folks from Mercer County in a moment. That funding there, the PD's office is funded at 65%. In Blair County, it's 62% of what the prosecutors get. The per capita, per person funding in Blair County on its public defender's office, so the amount that they spend per person, it's around $8.7, $8.70. The national average for per capita spending on indigent defense funding is $19.82. So you see the difference, right? You see the county struggling there. Numbers are one thing, but I have a couple stories from counties that will, I think, better show you what the numbers mean. One county I'm going to mention because that county was already mentioned in the lawsuit, and the other county I'm not going to name, and I think you'll see the reason why in a moment. But the stories talk about the way lack of funding leads to large caseloads and public defender overload. And so I'm going to start in Lebanon County. I'm going to start in Lebanon County in early May, where it's about midnight in the Lebanon County Jail, and a man named Ralph Warren gets a knock on his prison cell door. I don't know if either of you have ever been in a prison at night, but at night it's darker, more grim, it's quieter until it's not. Right? And from what I hear from speaking to people, it's hard to really get a night's sleep because you're always kind of on edge. But Mr. Warren gets this knock on his cell door at midnight to say his lawyer is there to talk to him. His lawyer is there at midnight. I'm sure he was confused. No one should have to meet with their lawyer at midnight. But he gets up and has a meeting with his lawyer. Lawyer's there to talk about the case. I knew about that from before the lawsuit because I talked to that lawyer 2 days, day and a half later on Friday. She had been to the prisons until 2 a.m. seeing clients. And eventually then gets called out in a lawsuit for being like an example of ineffectiveness and is kind of embarrassed by seeing that on a public stage. But to me, that lawyer wasn't at the jails until 2 a.m. seeing her clients because she's a bad lawyer. She was there because she's in court all the time and can only get out to see her clients in the middle of the night. It's a broken system. It's not a broken lawyer. Although at the time she was calling me, she was kind of broken down. This was a call I got on a Friday where she was essentially saying, Sarah, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I went to law school to be a public defender. It's all I ever wanted. It's who I am. And I am so tired, I can't think straight. There's no one else in her office to have this conversation with, so I get calls like this sometimes where she's saying essentially, is it okay if I stop? Is it okay if I put this down? Because I don't know if I can physically do this anymore. That wasn't the only call like that I got that Friday afternoon. I got a second call from a chief in a county that I'm not going to mention, but it's out here in this part of Pennsylvania. That chief has been working for the county for 21 years. They're about a year away from retirement. I'm going to call them Nick. It's not their name. Nick talks to their mom about once a week, and Nick's mom begs Nick to quit their job as chief because Nick's mom thinks Nick's body is going to give out before Nick hits that end of the year where their pension will kick in. Because there are so many cases, right? And Nick, as chief, is doing the things that chiefs should do in those instances. Nick filed motions with the court to say, my lawyers have too many cases. We're well overloaded. Please give some of our cases to conflict counsel. There are these constitutional requirements. We can't meet them. This is a county where the reputation, at least, is that if you're a contract lawyer and you take an appeal, you won't get your contract renewed next year, right? This is that kind of county. So between the time Nick filed these motions and the judges denied the motions, Nick was called up to the county executive's office and told, you can't keep filing these motions. You can't keep saying these things. You're making the judges mad. The true things that Nick was saying in these motions were that their lawyers were carrying on an average of 420 cases a lawyer, with the first assistant carrying more like 470. other thing happening in that county is that there's several hundred cases that have been given to the public defender's office that Nick hasn't assigned to a person. They're just kind of sitting there because the lawyers are so overloaded. But Nick got the message from the county executive there, and Nick understands that if Nick appeals these motions or keeps filing them, Nick's mom's going to get her wish, and Nick's not going to still be the chief in that office. And lest you think that I'm talking about some rural county, this is not a 6th or 7th class county up in this side of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Is it Allegheny County? Is that what we're talking about?
It is not Allegheny County. I will that
was
much I
kidding.
will tell you.
I knew.
I've been 32 years.
Yes. There you go.
Both of these stories show what happens when the funding is too low and the caseloads are too high. Neither of these counties, in neither of these counties is there the will or capacity to help these defenders. Our Pennsylvania's defenders need equal consideration to provide the justice that the Constitution requires. Moving cases quickly, shuffling bodies around is not the same thing as justice. So we are grateful for the $7.5 million. As that gets chopped up among 67 counties, it comes down to less help. But more will be needed over many more years to provide the kind of access to justice that the Constitution requires, that Pennsylvanians deserve, and that public defenders want to provide. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. Want to jump in?
Sure. I appreciate that. We are not doing a good job at our job. And I keep saying that about a lot of things of late. But, I'm wondering what we, the money is important, and I wonder if we have like a specific number. I mean, obviously, I've gone to other places and I've talked to public defenders, and the budgets that they have and the supports that they have is incredible. Is there a model that you have seen that Pennsylvania should be sort of aspiring to?
We're looking towards Michigan for leadership because they come very far very quickly, like Pennsylvania now does have, thanks to your efforts. We now have the Indigent Defense Advisory Committee, and you're going to hear from several members of that today. That's tasked to set standards, and I think the standards will be very useful in making clear what indigent defense needs to be. So Michigan's a good model to look towards. I can't sit here and give you a specific number. I can tell you that $7.5 million, not going to do it. Per capita spending is a good way to look at it. As far as I know, there's only one county, Philadelphia, that's funding at or above that national average for per capita. The last time there was a study on that, the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee did a study, came out in 2022. That's bipartisan, bicameral committee. The lowest was like $4.20 per capita. So per capita spending is a good way to look at it, because you wouldn't expect Philly with its numbers to fund at the same level as say like Beaver County or Lawrence County, right? That's one way to manage. I don't have a magic number I can get you yet. The IDAC is too early in its work for that.
Yeah, that's fair. So when we're talking about per capita spending, I think that's a fantastic model to look at. I guess I'm wondering if the national average doesn't go far enough.
But we're nowhere near that, right?
Yeah, correct.
Let's point us towards that.
Yes. So it's sort of shoot for the moon. But I would say that that's probably not even where we need to be, even at the national, because it takes into account these $4.70 per capita folks. the Philadelphia public defender is kind of an interesting outlier because it's not county-based. It's not a county department in the same way that all the other public defenders are. And I know there was a recent report here in Allegheny County also making that suggestion that we have a model separate from the county that sort of frees it up potentially to apply for grants, apply for other funding sources. But we've also kind of had pushback of that's not necessarily something that could or would be functional. So what's your perspective on that? Because I know that you've worked for the Philly Public Defender.
I have, and the second story I told you about the county I'm not naming speaks to public defender independence, right? Chiefs across Pennsylvania fear being fired for doing their jobs too well, and it's not like a hypothetical thing, right? That's what happened in Montgomery County a few years back. Last year, a chief in Luzerne County lost his job following a push for more funding and more staff. So something like the Philly model with a nonprofit board that contracts with the city for services allows some measure of independence for the chief defender, right? Because the hiring and firing is separate there. So independence is really important so that chiefs can do the job they're supposed to do and advocate and not fear filing the appeals that might be able to fix this issue of overcrowding. So it's part of it. It's not the full solution. Could it work here in Allegheny County aside from the politics? I don't know why not, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that from other folks speaking today.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Sarah, for all your work. So we appreciate hearing from you today. Thank you, Rep. Kincaid, as well. We're going to have Paul Heaton join up with us. Thank you. Independence, it did remind me of, obviously there are some models where the public defenders are elected, but I also still remember, real quick with it, a time with the, I was at doing a prelim here in Allegheny County, and I had a person on a welfare fraud case where she didn't report that she had lost a job. It took her 3 weeks. She got a new job that still would have qualified for the same benefits. She had child care benefits for 2 or 3 kids. And she didn't report it, but there's a box buried in 80 pages of paperwork that she was supposed to report it. She still would have benefited, she still would have qualified for the same benefits along the path. Well, and again, I do appreciate a lot of cooperation that can happen, but the ADA at the time did not want to. They wanted the person to go to ARD. And I was like, yeah. So anyhow, I ended up forcing a hearing, trying to get them to agree to something else. Long story short, after 2 hours, the district judge called my supervisor at the PD's office to get me to stop. So I said no, and that I told the supervisor, you have to come down here and replace me, but I'm not going to stop asking questions. But there was that pressure from the bench to limit representation. And she ended up not only going to ARD, but failing ARD. And she failed ARD because she couldn't afford it. Yeah. Paul, tell us good news. We're very glad to have Paul. Paul is a professor of law and academic director of, and I apologize, Paul,
Quattrone Center, yeah.
Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice at the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Penn Carey Law, Mr. Heaton served as the director of the Rand Institute for Civil Justice and professor at the Pardee Rand Graduate School. We appreciate all your work, and we're very glad to have you here today, Paul. And you do have a
Yeah. So for those in the room, you're welcome to follow along on the slide. So thanks for having me here, Representative Miller, Representative Kincaid. The question that you directed Representative Kincaid to Sarah is a great starting point for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to describe, if you want to advance the slide, some research. I'm a data guy, and so we recently published some research at the Quattrone Center trying to measure. We say that there's a resource shortfall. We don't have enough attorneys. Caseloads are too high. Can we actually measure how big that is? How does it vary across different places in Pennsylvania? Go ahead and advance, please. And so to do that, really, there's kind of three ingredients you need, right? We need to know something about how many cases are getting assigned to public defenders. We also need to know how much attorney time does it take to deal with an average case? And then finally, we need to compare that to existing staffing levels. So in our research for number one, we worked with the Administrative Office of the Pennsylvania Courts and got detailed data covering over a million criminal cases going back to 2015 with information about who was representing each client, what the charges were, outcomes of the cases, et cetera. For number two, if you want to advance the slide, we relied on a fairly recent and kind of nationally recognized study done by the RAND Corporation called the National Public Defense Workload Study. What RAND did is it got together about 30 experts from across the country, people who had substantial experience with indigent defense, including some folks here from Pennsylvania, and asked these experts what would be the amount of time it would take to meet the constitutional requirements and prevailing ethical requirements if you were representing a DUI case or a misdemeanor. And they gave them different types of cases, and they used a methodology called the Delphi method, which I won't talk about, to try and come up with an expert consensus. If you want to advance the slide, you can see here's some examples of the sort of numbers that we get. So for example, in a low-level DUI case that has a possible sentence of up to 2 years, these experts said it would take 19 hours of lawyer time to represent a typical case. Now, we know for any particular case, right, it might be simpler and it might take less, might be more complicated, it might take more. These are designed to be averages. And so what we did in our research is we took the RAND numbers and superimposed them on the data that we had. So if we have a public defender's office that has, 50 DUI cases, then that, equates to 800 hours of attorney time, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to advance the slide. So we actually have this information, and we've measured it across time for every single county in the Commonwealth. Here's what the numbers look like for Allegheny County. Just for time's sake, we won't look at others, but if you want to look at Blair and Mercer or any of the other counties, if you go to our final report, we can see it. What we find is that the demands that we're putting on our public defenders are quite substantial, right? For Allegheny, you can see it's in the tens or hundreds of thousands of hours, even for smaller counties, right? Not uncommon to find 10,000, 20,000 hours worth of attorney work. Now, with some additional assumptions, if you want to move forward, please, we can actually try and compare and calculate the workload per attorney. So we got information from right to know requests from all the public defenders to figure out how many lawyers do you have in your office. And then we said, okay, if we were to divide up the workload across the lawyers, how many hours per lawyer would that be? Now, there's a bunch of important simplifying assumptions that we do here, like we leave out appeals and juvenile cases and civil cases. Rob and Lena would probably fairly say, hey, for a place like Allegheny that's doing a whole bunch of other stuff, in addition to adult criminal cases, these are going to be substantial underestimates. I wouldn't argue with them there. So if anything, these are highly conservative estimates. What you'll see is that even with this highly conservative methodology, what we find is that the vast majority of counties don't have enough lawyers. So if you want to move forward, here's the kind of workload based on our calculations per attorney for some of the counties that we're talking about today, right? Places like Philadelphia or Allegheny may be a little bit better. The county I live in, Montgomery County, we have about 2,800 hours of work per lawyer per year, and that's just, again, in adult criminal court.
Just for clarification, this is per year?
Yeah, this is per year. Yeah, annual workload. And you can think about, for those of you who have worked as lawyers, billable hours and how these might compare. In fact, if you want to advance two more, I think one kind of, go ahead and advance one more, one telling comparison we do in our report. So the American lawyer goes to all the biggest law firms every year and asks them about billable hours. The single individual in the 100 largest law firms in the United States who billed the most hours managed to bill 3,733 hours, which is astonishing. By our calculations, in 36 of the 66 counties with public defender offices, every single lawyer would have to bill more than that guy in order to meet the minimum standards. So I think that just gives you an idea of how significant these shortfalls are. Obviously, that's not realistic. If you want to go forward again. We can also actually calculate, and we do in our report, the volume of shortfalls in particular offices. So I'll show you a sample calculation for where I live, Montgomery County. As of the time we got our data, we had 41.5 FTEs of attorneys. Go ahead and click it forward, please. Based upon the number of cases that's flowing into Montgomery County, and if we assume that each lawyer can bill 2,080 hours, which again is really a lot, right? Probably a more reasonable number would be in the 1,700s, but let's imagine we can do 40 hours a week, right? That equates to 57 attorneys worth of work, so we have a shortfall, go ahead and keep clicking forward, of about 40% in Montgomery County. And we've done those calculations for all of the different counties in the Commonwealth. If you want to go forward, we can see a map that just kind of shows what this looks like. One of the interesting findings is that shortfalls are widespread, but they're not universal. We do have some counties which, based on this methodology at least, seem to be doing a bit better, and they're in different parts of the state. They're of different sizes, right? It's not all just small counties. Go ahead and click one forward. However, right, as you mentioned, Representative Miller, in aggregate, right, one of the things that we see is the vast majority of counties don't have enough attorneys. And so in 91% of them, the number of attorneys available is insufficient to meet the basic constitutional and ethical standards. I'll just conclude with a couple of observations. So if you want to click ahead and click one more. Why should we care about this? I think there's actually really a number of reasons. First of all, this has been mentioned by other speakers, right? It's in the Constitution, right? And we have to ask, are we going to take those guarantees seriously or not? I think for those who are very pro-law enforcement, I'll go back to something you mentioned, Representative Miller, right? This is an adversarial system, and it's designed to function best when each side is doing its role, right? Prosecutors and judges, if they want to come to the just result in any particular case, they need to have a full set of contextual information about what happened, about the person before them, and public defenders are critical in providing that information, right? So we're not allowing law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges to do their job effectively when we skimp on public defense. It's also the case, right, that our decisions here have big implications for spending at the state level on corrections and other things. So my own other research that has been cited by the governor and by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court shows, for example, that decisions that Philadelphia made about how it would staff indigent defense, maybe a few $100,000 here or there, ultimately implicated about $300 million worth of correctional spending by the state of Pennsylvania as a result of what happened. Other research shows that properly staffed public defense can substantially reduce incarceration with no harm to public safety. And again, that means savings for state taxpayers on the correctional system. Let me just end with one tiny idea for what can we do about all of this. So one simple idea would be when we're thinking about how much state funding should go to indigent defense, to actually tether that in some way to the size of our correctional and our police budgets, right? And the logic there is that if we're spending more on corrections, then presumably there's more of a need for information, and so we ought to be spending more on indigent defense. To just give an example of how that would work, right? Let's imagine, go ahead and advance once more, that we were to take 1 cent out of every dollar that the state spends on corrections and police and use it to fund indigent defense. Now that, I'm a fiscally conservative person, but that doesn't seem like a crazy idea, right? 1 cent out of every dollar. Go ahead, advance one more. So that's $43 million per year, substantially above the investment that we're currently making. Based on my numbers, probably not close to what we would need, but certainly a substantial step. All right, I think I'll stop there if you want to advance once more. If you're interested in learning more, there's a QR code in the full study.
Thank you, Paul. Keep that up for a while, right? Okay. You know, I was trying to think that there would be more optimism with that, but, you know, Paul, thank you so much for your work, and it does form the basis for a lot of conversation, there's no doubt. There are, like, I guess a couple things that kind of get to me with it, though, too, is I have a resolution that I've been working on regarding, long story short, the operating cost of the courts. So right now, back when I came out of law school, roughly, about 1% of the court's operating budget used to be dependent upon fines or costs that were paid by the people who they supervise. That number now is approaching 20%, right? And I find that to be part of this erosion of public trust that comes into play. And I know there's several public defenders who are here. And how many times have they heard, or I've heard, we've heard that, well, public defenders are not, that's not a good attorney, it's not a good defense, you know, and it's overwhelmingly because that the system is so structured in a way that it impacts our ability to provide that quality constitutional defense. So your numbers are striking and damning as to what isn't being done. And the last thing that I thought about here too is part of it is, what's the goal when you say the typical case? Well, what's the goal of that representation? You know, and obviously most attorneys would say, you know, to zealously represent their clients, you know, to the fullness of the law and so forth. But occasionally one has to question when we look at what the results are telling us. We're in a system where 97% of people plead. Right, where the right to trial is becoming, some would argue, no longer exists in our state, given largely the legislative construct that we've passed down regarding sentencing and penalties, but also the expectations by some as to what this wheel of justice is supposed to look like. And some would, some don't appreciate perhaps when the fullness of representation is sought or applied in a case. So I do sometimes wonder if the goals are different. So if the idea is that we're supposed to be keeping this nonstop system moving so that people are done by work at 5 or something, then business as usual seems to be some degree of the approach. If the idea is that we should be improving our constitutional representation of the people before the court, then it is hard-pressed to say that we are anywhere near accomplishing that here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those comments. I certainly agree, although I might actually say, even for the people who think we ought to just be running the treadmill and the machine, I think there's actually still a very good argument based on both the fiscal effects of these decisions, but also ultimately, right, if you believe the current system and you're kind of okay with it, it's a system that's based on rapidly acquiring the necessary information to make a good decision. And we know that public defenders play a critical role in doing that for all the actors in the system.
You mentioned conservative, and I'll let you go. I want to thank you with it. But, you know, one of the things I often say, too, is of public defenders, conservatives ideologically should love public defenders because they are like the ultimate sort of backstop against overreaching government. Before the government is going to pull your rights or your freedom from you in some way, there's a burden to be met. And no matter how rich or poor, you're entitled to that burden being met. Thank you, Paul, for your time and your work. One of those counties that he had up on the map, Blair County. What was your color, Julia?
What was my color?
Yeah, what was your color? Did you see his color?
Oh, I was the one at the bottom that had
Bright red?
5,000 something hours a year that I would
Yeah.
need to spend.
I know, amazing. Well, listen, we are glad to have Julia Burke here. She is the first assistant public defender in Blair County and has served as a public defender in the county for over a decade. She's a champion for those with mental health issues, which I appreciate the speciality. She helped develop the curriculum for the crisis intervention training program for Blair County law enforcement, which I'm sure is also impactful. So we are very glad to have Julia here. So thank you.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, please interrupt. What I thought I could talk about is what the experience is to be a public defender in Blair County, in a rural county. We're about 40 minutes south of State College, so it's a very rural county, it's a very poor county. And I often joke that I'm a social worker with a law degree, but it's not that much of a joke because the majority of the time that I spend doing this work is not really spent being a lawyer. We don't have a social worker in our office. We don't have an investigator in our office. And obviously, just based on that data, we have massively more cases than our attorneys can handle. Similar to some of Sarah's comments, we spend so much time in court that even just being able to check my voicemail is often a challenge. And there's a lot that a public defender has to do, especially in a poor county like mine, that isn't captured by caseload statistics or discussing how long it would take to defend a murder case or a DUI case or anything like that. We had a situation during jury selection a couple weeks ago where we had a client who was a very large person and didn't have any court-appropriate clothing. And we rallied the troops, basically, and called every retailer in the area to find out what the largest pants they had. And it turns out that they didn't have ones large enough. The judge was extremely upset because they wanted to pick this jury. But we just didn't have the resources necessary to A, anticipate that this was going to be an issue in advance, and B, acquire those items so that he could have a fair trial. And that's just one example, but there's an aggregate impact of all of this, especially when you have this huge caseload. And I can just say personally, the times that I felt like closest to just being done are the times when I spend a great deal of time doing things that I don't feel like I should have to do at all. Sometimes you are just pleading for the most basic level of empathy from people in charge, and it just seems like there's no appreciation for the toll that takes on the attorneys. It's very demoralizing to feel like no matter how hard you work, you're doing a terrible job, because even when you succeed, it doesn't feel like this great victory. It feels like, oh, we avoided that particular tragedy, and now I have, 1,000 other things that I have to do on the back end of that. And you'd ask the last speaker what the goal is, and I kind of joke with the police about this a lot. My goal is that you never interact with my client again. And there's a little more work that goes into that. It's not just getting a good outcome in my case. It's making sure that I'm not setting up that person without the resources that they need so that they can be successful. And one thing that I've watched over the years that's just been really hard to see up close is that when we have certain programs in place, mental health is my particular interest. When we have these robust outpatient programs, people do well, they succeed. And when they lose access to those programs, predictably things fall apart. I had a client that comes to mind that lost case management services, and from the moment he lost his case manager to when I finally got things under control, he picked up 15 new cases. because he couldn't figure out things on his own. He needed somebody to help walk him through it. When we got his case management reestablished, no more cases. And when we got to sentencing, we were 8.5 months out from when we got case management reestablished. And so we had this very clear example of where when these programs are not available, we get bad outcomes for everybody. And it's a lot more expensive for everybody too. I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to figure out what a person needs in order to be successful, but I need to have certain resources to be able to do that. And it's interesting being here in Allegheny County because I know we all echo similar problems, but I have had a couple clients that we try to get into the system in Allegheny County because there's resources here that I simply don't have. And I'll get, phone calls from, I have a client in a program in Allegheny County now that it sounds incredible. And her caseworker was trying to explain to me what was all involved in it and couldn't understand what I didn't understand because we don't have anything like that. At the end of the day, it is, as I said, the aggregate effect of all of this is tremendous. And I can tell you our jail, our jail is in such a condition that over the summer, it was over 100 degrees on the main housing blocks. They were going around handing out ice to the inmates to try to cool them down a little bit. That's the circumstances in which I need to take somebody that wasn't stable in the community and somehow come up with a solution that not only gets them out there, but gets them set up for success when those are the conditions they've been living in. And we weren't doing well in the beginning. And it's little things like even getting, in my county, getting USB drives that IT will approve of. I once had a judge from the bench order me $40 to be able to buy something because I wasn't able to download my discovery. It was a big case and I couldn't even get the discovery because it was too big of a file and we didn't have the technology available to acquire that. And I just find it, it's often said that it's very expensive to be poor. And I think that that can be extrapolated a bit into the indigent defense space too. We are spending a whole lot of money making people's lives worse. We could save a lot of money and, hey, also help improve people's lives. Nobody wants the same people coming through the system, but if we had the resources to be able to actually solve the problem, or at least work on it, we'd save a whole lot. I mean, there is that data, and I really didn't want to focus on the data because I just want to focus on the subjective experience of being in a small county, because I went to law school to be a public defender. I think it is the perfect job for me in a lot of ways, but as Sarah had mentioned, she's received those phone calls from me too. And there have been a number of times, especially in the past year or two, where I didn't know if I could keep doing it. I know it's affecting my health. I have the same calls from my mom all the time. And I want to do it. Like, that's what I want to be clear. I want to do it. I want to help. But we just need to get a little bit more support from the state in order to be able to do that. One thing I guess I'll just kind of finish up with is one of the greatest compliments that I get from clients are when I'm bad with faces, but I'll see somebody in the store or in the courthouse even that was like, oh, hey, Julie, and starts telling me all about their life and updating me on all the things, and I don't recognize them. And a lot of that is because it's not that I wasn't sincere that I cared about them. It's just there's so many people that we're capable of helping. And we just want to be able to do more of that.
Julie, thank you for being a public defender. Okay.
Thank you for being a public defender.
Yeah. It's so thank you for sharing so much with that. And look, it's when we say a little bit of help from the state. And we'll finish. We'll come back to this point with it later too. But the reality of it is you're shopping counties to have your clients have access to the supports that would more likely not have them return into the system in one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're talking about, right? you should not have to do that. So thank you for highlighting that today, and very much appreciate your testimony today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so Veronica Miller, we're no relation.
No.
No relation.
Miller by marriage.
Not that we don't know any yet. Yeah, Veronica Miller is Senior Policy Counsel for Criminal Legal Reform at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Before joining the ACLU, Veronica served as Deputy Chief Counsel for the Pennsylvania Senate Democratic Appropriations Committee. I don't even think I knew that. Did you tell me that? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. And played a key role in legislation that created the Indigent Defense Advisory Committee. So we are very glad to have Veronica here, and I know she has a PowerPoint as well. So Veronica, please.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, and it wasn't in my bio, but I started my legal career as a public defender. I was a public defender in Dauphin County, and it's really impacted my work today. Like it's fundamental to what I do. I know we're probably going to try to get a little bit quickly through my first bit of the slides, but I think we need to sort of set the stage, but then we'll eventually talk about our litigation, Warren v. Commonwealth, if you advance the slide. So a little background about the right to counsel, why indigent defense matters, a little bit about the system, and then the litigation itself. Go ahead. Go ahead again. So this man here, Gideon, the reason that we are talking about this, we have a constitutional right to counsel. We have talked about
I'm sorry, no laughing at the picture in the back. That's a good picture of the gentleman, but I just see the laughter in the back. All right, go ahead.
If you have a chance to read the story of him, it's really impressive. I won't go into that just for sake of time. But so we have these constitutional rights to counsel. This case made it applicable to the states, and this is why the state should bear the burden, right? We have a right to effective assistance to counsel. That means meaningful adversarial testing at critical stages, and we want to see these traditional markers of legal representation. Go ahead, advance the slide. So, another person had alluded to the critical stages. This is post-indictment pretrial lineups, pretrial interrogations, arraignments, preliminary hearing, discovery, all this list of extremely critical points in a person's criminal proceeding, and yet we do not provide those here in Pennsylvania. And then when we look at the markers of representation, that means that if we do not have earlier appointment of counsel, timely and confidential communication, ability to thoroughly investigate and review cases, ability to have motion practice, case preparation, that can lead to the constructive denial of counsel. Go ahead. So why does indigent defense matter? And everybody who's spoken before me has laid it out fully. Thank you. But it is foundational to our criminal justice system. We cannot have a system where your justice depends on your wealth and privilege. That is inherently unfair. It is not what we have in our Constitution. But more so, it provides accountability. It is, I believe you said, the checks against our government from taking our rights before having due process. Go ahead. And it restores trust. There are so many times when, as a public defender, I remember having to tell my client, yes, I'm an attorney. I work for you. I don't work for the district attorney, because that was a sentiment that was shared across the board for anybody who had been previously represented by a public defender. And it's sad to have to do that with your client. But if we reform the system, we have that trust that the clients can believe that we are working for them, and they believe that the outcome is fair. And talking about better outcomes, when we fund public defenders, we have the ability to unlock these innovative type practices. And for some, it shouldn't be innovative, but that Allegheny County provides counsel at preliminary arraignment is an innovation for many counties, which it shouldn't be. But when we do have robust representation, we also have the ability to break these root causes and address the systemic poverty that is facing so many of public defender clients, and we get to improve public safety. And I mean, there's so many more other reasons, but reducing incarceration, right? There is a direct decarceral effect when we have good public defense. So a little bit about our system. I think it's important to note that we have had our Public Defender Act since 1968. There haven't been any significant changes to it, but if you look at this list, this is what is required representation. So in Professor Heaton's study, it is a conservative view because it only takes into account those criminal proceedings, but as you can see, juvenile delinquency proceedings, mental health commitments, probation and parole proceedings, including revocations. Those are some of the most timely and labor-intensive types of hearings that most people don't even recognize that that's something that public defenders do. Go ahead. And so this Public Defender Act has led to so many deficiencies. It's county funded. It's county administered. We have minimal guidance. We have no state oversight, lacking of independence. I'll go on, but we'll go ahead and advance. So what does it look like in terms of the system? Over 55% of criminal cases are handled by a public defender's office. That is 117,000 cases per year, and that also means 17,000 adult criminal cases are handled by appointed counsel, about 12,000 juvenile delinquency cases, and plus thousands more probation parole hearings, indirect criminal contempt, and the mental health commitments that we mentioned before. So this is not a new problem to Pennsylvania. There have been decades of warnings of the problem that has been building over time. And I think what is very significant is that I still don't know if people in the position to make the decisions about how much money we can put into the system are fully aware of where we are, because we have just decades and decades of neglect. But so you had mentioned the Doyle versus Allegheny County in 1996. That class action lawsuit led to the settlement that provided the funding to hire you, Rep. Miller. And then And then we have in 2003, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had a committee on racial gender bias in the courts, and they concluded that the General Assembly has pretty much neglected their obligations, and the right to counsel is not being fulfilled. Then in 2011, we have a joint state government commission that draws nearly the same conclusions as the 2003 report. And then in 2012, we have Curran v. Luzerne, which is the case that we are building off of in our Warren v. Commonwealth. But so that case has led the way to challenge the system by alleging these constructive denials of counsel, because we, again, don't have those markers of representation at the critical stages. And then after 2012, so I feel I was surprised, but we didn't really see much movement. It's difficult to sue a county, but it's more difficult to try to make this change when it is sort of like a county by county basis, and that's the kind of system we have. And I think you had asked, what is the better kind of system? And we need something that ensures the parity of representation between counties. So even carving out counties like Philadelphia or Allegheny and making their own systems, that doesn't address the fact that you can go from county to county and have different representation, which is not what the Constitution requires. But so we get to 2011, and we have, again, another study that basically just tells us everything that we already knew. If you go ahead and advance. So this brings me to our litigation overview, and before I delve into the particulars, I'd like to read a quote from the 2011 report. And I feel this on a personal level because I was a public defender and I knew how much I cared But so the problem is not the public defenders themselves, but the system in which they work. Most public defenders are hardworking, committed, and competent professionals. The problem is that they must work against daunting obstacles, inadequate training and oversight, severely limited resources, and unmanageable caseloads. In many Pennsylvania counties, the most brilliant and accomplished lawyer could not provide adequate representation because he or she simply would not have the time and resources needed to mount a constitutionally adequate defense. This is a quote from a report in 2011, which is basically a quote from the report in 2003. We have known this for so long, yet we've just turned a blind eye to it. And so I read that to say that what we have laid out in our case is not a comment on the attorneys themselves, but the system in which they are working. And I believe it was Chief Burke and Sarah Jacobson was talking about these are people behind these cases. And so in order to bring these cases, we have to have our clients. And so in our litigation, our respondents, those are the people who were suing the Commonwealth, the governor, and the leadership of the General Assembly. And our petitioners, 17 named people from 9 different counties. I won't name off the counties, but so we are doing this as a class action for all individuals who are now or will face in the future criminal charges and the possibility of confinement, and they would be appointed counsel. And so we are building off our constructive denial of representation. So go ahead and advance. And so our claims basically boil down to 2 things: violations of the right to counsel, violations of equal protection. Each county handles their case, it handles their offices different, but representation is so starkly different from county to county that there is no equal protection. Go ahead. So what are our goals? I think it was important to kind of get this out up front. Our legal win would be holding the Commonwealth responsible, because that is where the seat of responsibility should lie. And that means that no matter the county you are charged, you get effective criminal defense representation. Our policy win, these sometimes are not exactly the same, but our policy win is that we need the Commonwealth to fund and provide oversight to our public defenders' offices so that they can provide the robust representation that they want to, but also that the clients require. Go ahead. So I won't spend too much time on some of these slides because we sort of talked about it before, but right, appointment of counsel at critical stages. We see throughout our petition for review, our complaint, that many of the clients who we have late appointment of counsel. And we know that lives can be disrupted within 3 days of incarceration. But so most of the time, people do not get the opportunity to meet with their attorney until the preliminary hearing. And we already know that that's 2, maybe 6 weeks by the time that they have been incarcerated. And that is completely disruptive. But it also means that there's no opportunity to investigate, prepare, and lost opportunity to advocate for bail. Go ahead. And then this also leads to the inadequate investigations. There are counties that do not have investigators, as we heard, but there are counties where the investigators don't actually get to spend much time doing the investigating because they're screening people for indigency and whether or not they qualify for representation. And then you have the tough choice of having to decide which case I send an investigator to check, because I can't possibly send them to every single one. Go ahead. And then we have the lack of communication. And I mean, everything that is in the complaint, I have felt on a personal level, and I have experienced not being able to talk to my client, or being in a holding cell with 10 other people trying to talk to my client about the deal that the district attorney just gave to me, and we're trying to talk it out. And that is just not what is good representation and the ability to actually have meaningful communication with your client. Again, it goes back to that trust that you can't build if you never have the ability to have that communication. And I won't talk about Mr. Warren's case specifically, but he had misdemeanor cases, M3 and misdemeanor possession. Ended up spending 3 months in incarceration. Eventually was given a plea of 1 year of probation. But still, he didn't have the ability to post bail. He didn't have the ability to advocate for himself. And lives are disrupted. Go ahead. And the lack of advocacy, Rep. Miller, you had mentioned this, and this is a direct result of not having the ability to prepare. But we know that 95% of convictions were due to guilty pleas, and that in 6 counties, 100% conviction is by guilty plea. The right to having effective assistance of counsel is the right to have your case, again, the quote, the right to the accused to require the prosecution's case to survive the crucible of meaning adversarial testing. We have to have the ability to have trials. Go ahead. And so overwhelming caseloads.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
6 counties in Pennsylvania, 100% of the, can you say that again?
So the percent of convictions coming from pleas ranged from 98% in Philadelphia to 100% in 6 counties. So there are 6
counties in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
It's only guilty pleas.
Yes.
There's no trial.
That was from the 2011 LBFC report. And I can.
No, that's,
2011, that's from the 20.
Oh, sorry, 20, yes,
Yeah.
2021.
The numbers are.
Yes, 2021 report.
that's really hard to actually do. Like a shocking. Okay. No, nobody else freaked out by it?
That it's astounding to me, because one of the first things that I learned in criminal law was, like, if your conviction rate is too high or too low, it means that you're doing something wrong. It's sort of 98% guilty plea just says.
Do you have those counties?
100% says we're doing something wrong.
You don't need to say it now.
I do.
Can you provide us, just so I know the answer? But I'm sorry. Yeah, I just had to pause. It just, look, I get concerned with, I think I said 97% earlier today. So it is something, again, when we talk about rights and the exercise of them. When you do, as Rep. Kincaid was mentioning, when you do see those extremes, you can't help but pause and question what isn't perhaps being done. But I guess that's your point. So go ahead.
Right. Attorneys do not have the ability to have those trials. But so go to the next slide. And that is because of overwhelming caseloads. This leads to something that we, triaging is a common phrase that you hear attorneys talk about, because they have to prioritize their clients, their cases. And, again, you have to determine where the seriousness is, but then that does mean that other cases and other people are falling through the cracks, and that does lead to this very internal and moral question for attorneys. And I think, Chief Burke, laid it out beautifully, but it begins to weigh on you as an attorney. But so, this was back in 2011 where, they noted that lawyers often carry caseloads so excessive as to dramatically impede the ability of counsel to provide competent, effective, and ethically responsible representation. Again, I don't know if I can say this enough, but the information has been here. It is not unknown, and we cannot continue to turn a blind eye to what has been here for us. But so, yeah, thank you. Limited oversight and lack of independence. This is one of the things that I think is the most difficult about the current system that we have, is that public defenders, again, they are susceptible to the political and judicial influences that affect their ability to represent, but also we don't have the ability to have guidance for appointment of counsel, no uniform eligibility of standards, but we don't have something to keep people accountable to the type of representation that everybody should enjoy. And we We shouldn't have counties trying to shop other counties to try to get their clients more favorable outcomes because they simply don't have the resources for them. Go ahead. So this leads us to the ultimate conclusion here, right, is that we have inadequate funding. There's just no doubt about that we do not have enough funding, and that is leading to these violations of right to counsel and equal protection because we can't have sufficient staffing. We have unattainably high caseloads. We have counties that are losing their attorneys because they are overworked, burnt out, and can go and work for the Commonwealth and make a better salary, still doing work that they feel passionate about. But so if we look at the table here, Pennsylvania spends $10.25. That includes the $7.5 million and the $125 or so million that counties are already spending on public defense. And so if we're just looking at numbers, in order to just get us to the national average, we need to at least double the amount of money that we are currently spending. That is $133 million that we need to put into the system. And that gets us to a floor, not the ceiling. Other states that have similar situational problems, Missouri, Mississippi, other states that have led and are committed to systemic reform, Massachusetts, New Mexico, my home state, and Michigan, which is a state that we often look to as a corollary for what's happening here in Pennsylvania. But so, go ahead. And I'm happy to take any questions on the litigation itself, but I believe everybody who spoke before me spoke well on that.
I just think that you have to recuse yourself as a member of House leadership.
Yeah, she didn't sue me. Thank you very much, Veronica. Seriously, a lot of good information there for very nice slides, but a lot of good information that comes together, and we could see the foundation for why the ACLU has moved into this arena, which seems all too often dependent upon the ACLU or some third-party organization to effectuate a greater realization of people's rights. I'd like to tell you that that I don't know if that's going to continue to be something that's needed, but unfortunately, until we come to a larger understanding of the state responsibility in providing it, your work is probably going to continue to be necessary. So.
Yeah, one thing to that point is that, you know, we have legislation that put into effect, right? Our Indigent Defense Advisory Committee, and we do have this grant money, and we are thankful that people have started to think about the issue. But one of the reasons why the litigation is as important as we believe it is because we need to continue the pressure. We need to continue the conversation because it is often too easy to make a change, enact legislation, and think that the job is done. It's not done, and so that's one of the reasons why we brought this case when we did. We couldn't wait to do it any longer.
Veronica, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate you. Okay, we have our two final speakers. We're very glad to have with us Rob Perkins. Rob is a criminal defense attorney here in Allegheny County, former public defender, founder and president of the Allegheny Lawyers Initiative for Justice, and we very much appreciate him making time to join us today to provide some thoughts as to his experience and the work that the Allegheny Lawyers Initiative for Justice has undertaken. Rob?
Thank you, Representative Miller, Representative Kincaid. Talked to you both before about the report we recently published. So a little bit about me. I worked in the public defender's office twice, actually. My heart is still in the public defender's office. When I worked there, at that point in time, before they had the recent salary bump, my salary was such that when I had my second child and we had to hire a babysitter, my babysitter's salary was more than my public defender's salary, and so I had to get a new job or lose money by going to work every day. So there has been some improvements, but we still have far to go. So myself and several private defense lawyers, along with some social workers, investigators, other people who care about public defense in Allegheny County and throughout the Commonwealth, got together a few years ago to start a nonprofit And we had several reasons for doing so, but one of them is that we need an independent voice for public defense. Because without independence, without somebody speaking out, without fear of reprisal about what needs to change, then we're never going to see real change, was the theory. And we are fortunate to have a county executive who cares about these issues more and is more outspoken on these issues than ever before. But nevertheless, it was important for us to have this independence and authentic voice about what we can do to improve public defense. So we published this report, myself and Dan Eichinger, who used to be one of the leaders in the Public Defender's Office, Lauren Stoner, who's here today, also contributed. I would just note a couple things about the prior speakers. They were all amazing. Paul Heaton's a public defense data legend, to the extent that's a category, and we appreciate the work he's done. I did quibble with his map. Allegheny County was green. I think it should be purple, and then Blair County should be some color off the color wheel. But it's really important work. We need data. We need data to make these arguments, and we need to do a better job of telling stories as well. I listened to Attorney Burke tell her story about Blair County, and it really resonated with me, and it almost brought me to tears because it's more about the clients, but it's also about the people that do this work, and it takes it out of you. I've had friends who really struggled with substance use issues and mental health issues because you bring this work home with you, and it impacts them and their families as well. I was taking notes throughout, and every time one speaker came up, I was going to talk about something different. But I'll talk about a few things. One of the questions Representative Miller you asked is, what is the goal? What are we trying to do through public defense? And there's a lot of answers to that question. To me, the first question from an individual level is reduce harms. And we know that people that come through the criminal legal system that don't get adequate representation, or even if they do, they're labeled felons, they go to jail, they are harmed as a result. A person with a felony conviction faces a host of lifelong collateral consequences. They can lose their driver's license. They are immediately barred from millions of job opportunities. It drives people into poverty. It creates generational cycles of people who come in and out of the criminal legal system because one of the #1 root causes of crime and arrests is poverty, along with substance use and mental health issues. Two other answers I have to that question. We talk about the Constitution. The Constitution is something I care deeply about, and I sometimes wonder if the public is moved by the constitutional arguments as I am, but two things that everyone, I think, agrees with is saving taxpayer money and protecting public safety. And the truth is that investing in public defense achieves both of those goals, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In fact, I'll cite Mr. Heaton's study. But I thought what might be helpful is that, and we heard a lot about the problems and challenges of representing indigent clients when you're overwhelmed with cases. I've had the opportunity to represent both poor people and rich people throughout my years of service. So in addition to my stints at the Public Defender's Office, I spent the last 10 years in private practice, and people pay me to represent them. And so I always think in contrast what I'm able to do with 40 cases as opposed to 400 cases. And there was a time at the Public Defender's Office where I was assigned to what's called the Phoenix docket, which is rocket docket, ton of cases, usually low-level felonies, misdemeanor cases. And the way it worked at that time in the Public Defender's Office anyways is I wouldn't meet my clients until I got to court. I usually didn't have any discovery. I had a bare-bones police report. And I would have 5 to 7 cases a day, about 20 cases a week, in addition to my existing caseload. And I did my best, but it's impossible to provide adequate, thorough representation when you have that volume of cases. And the bad outcomes that stick with me are the people that go to prison, and it's also the people that face their first criminal conviction. And I remember a client, and this one stuck with me because it was a young man who had no prior criminal history. I met him for the first time in this Phoenix docket, and the plea offer was that if he pled guilty, he'd avoid prison, but he'd be labeled a felon. And this is a young person who's thinking about, #1 goal, I want to go home, and I don't want to go to jail. And if they're giving me a way out of that possibility, I'll take it. So this young man pleaded guilty, left the courthouse that day, 6 months non-reporting probation. And I think about that case and cases like it all the time to say, I barely knew the kid's name. He was 18 years old, and he was going to face a lifelong of disastrous consequences, perhaps a lifetime of poverty for himself and his children, And we didn't know anything about him. We didn't know why he ended up in the criminal justice system. I didn't even know if he was guilty or innocent, quite frankly. I pray to God he was factually guilty, but I don't know. I didn't know if he had, what defenses he may have had, because I just didn't have time to thoroughly investigate 20 cases a week. It was I didn't have enough time in the day. And I contrast that with some cases I've taken privately, and I remember recently I represented a kid that attended the University of Pittsburgh, charged with the same offense, a low-level drug felony. In fact, he was caught with more drugs than this poor kid who ended up with a felony conviction. And I met with the client and his dad multiple times before the hearing. I postponed the hearing for several months, and I ultimately got to know him and understood that he was really struggling in college, as many freshmen do, and he had depression, anxiety, wasn't seeing a therapist, wasn't taking any medication, and made some terrible judgment calls. But by the time we got back to court, I was able to prepare a pretty compelling mitigation package for the prosecutor to say that, look, this kid, he was struggling with mental health issues. He's addressing them now. He's healthy. He's doing great. He's taking classes at CCAC. He's already been punished, got disciplined by the school, so he's been held accountable. Let's not make this young person a felon. And in my experience, prosecutors will listen to those arguments when you give them a reasonable alternative option. But you can't do that unless you have the time to spend with the client and you have the resources to spend with the client to get to know them and understand those issues. And ultimately, they agreed to withdraw the felony. He went through a diversion program and he had his record expunged. So he has a second chance, and this criminal charge will not follow him around for the rest of his life. And I think that was a fair outcome for the kid from Pitt, but it's absolutely unfair that the kid who didn't have the money to hire an attorney who had the time to spend on the case and adequately investigate and thoroughly investigate did not. And that one moves me as far as public defense, is the unfairness that poor people get treated differently than rich people. A couple other quick themes I wanted to address, and I referred to Paul Heaton's study, is that how can we improve public defense? I've always been very moved by the Bronx Defenders model of representation, which is a holistic approach. And essentially, it's lawyers that team up with social workers and social service advocates. And in addition to representing clients in the courtroom, they help people connect to services. So if they don't have health insurance, they get connected to government programs. If the need is mental health treatment, then they connect them to services. If the need is adequate housing, they can help connect them to housing. Again, addressing the root causes of arrests and crime. And ultimately, people get better outcomes. And the study that Paul Heaton and his colleagues prepared and ran, they looked at outcomes for the Bronx Defenders over a 15-year period versus another public defense firm locally that did not employ this holistic approach. And what they determined was that the Bronx clients avoided 1.1 million days of incarceration. And that saved taxpayers $165 million in jail housing costs. And I'm on the jail oversight board. There's nothing more expensive than the jail. And from a rehabilitation perspective, every 100 times out of 100, people are going to get better drug treatment in the community in an inpatient treatment facility than they are in jail. So to the extent we can keep people safely out of jail and get them the treatment they need, everybody benefits. As Paul also noted, while Bronx clients were able to avoid 1 million days in jail, there was no harm to public safety, no uptick in rearrest rates. And there's actually promising research that shows that when you embed social workers into public defense practices, that people are less likely to be arrested. It reduces recidivism, improves public safety. I think if we're going to prioritizing, first of all, public defenders need more money for lawyers to provide basic services, but then we also need to start to develop this more holistic approach to address these root causes, because it doesn't work today. In most cases, kids end up with a felony with 6 months of non-reporting probation. They don't even know their probation officer's name. People don't trust the person that arrested them to say, hey, I sold drugs because I have mental health issues, but they trust their attorneys. Their attorneys get to know them. They understand kind of the driving factors, and they're the best uniquely situated to help make the proper service referrals. I try to be quick.
Rob, you gave a lot. So thank you for the passion, obviously, to which we can tell regarding your representation, both in the public and in the private sector. And we definitely appreciate you sort of putting a face to some of those challenges. And as we talk about, one of the things that gets me when we talk about the Bronx model is the challenges that Em and I will often talk about in relation to access to services that don't depend on you getting arrested. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it is one of those things that we struggle with in Harrisburg, right? Because we definitely, there's so much to think about in relation to embedding of social services at different parts. But we are struggling still as a state to not make it a requirement that you can get access as long as you get arrested. And that is something that we're struggling with. But your point is well taken. So thank you so much for bringing that up to us today and for all your work with the Allegheny Lawyers Initiative for Justice. We appreciate all of your efforts to highlight things that can make things better. Thank you. And our final speaker is, oh, good. For a second, she's behind Rob. I was like, I hope she didn't leave. Is Ms. Autumn Johnson. She is the Chief Public Defender in Mercer County and is a board member of the Public Defenders Association of PA. In 2024, she was appointed to the PA Indigent Defense Advisory Committee and is co-chair of the Professional and Services Standards Subcommittee. Ms. Johnson, thank you for waiting so long. We appreciate you.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As you said, I am the Chief Public Defender in Mercer County. I have been with the Public Defender's Office in that county for 12 years. I've been the chief for 2, practicing for 17 years, all in what we would call poverty law. So this is my passion. And I'm very happy to be here today and representing Mercer County. Mercer County is a 5th-class county. Our county seat is the actual town of Mercer. Our office, in general, is relatively staffed well when we are able to fill the positions. I am in the process of hiring a social service advocate, which would be the role of a social worker. That required me to do some strategic and creative financial requests to get to that point. But I do believe in what was termed earlier today, the holistic defense for our office. I also want to mention that when we're talking about indigent defense and public defenders, we are talking about other attorneys involved in the system that have to deal with conflicts. And so when there's a conflict with the Public Defender's Office, smaller counties like ours do require attorneys with some knowledge in criminal defense to contract with the county to do those cases. In our county, we do have 5 of those attorneys. The way that our county is structured for payment of those attorneys, I think, is an issue, and hopefully something that will get addressed as we get closer to and we have more conversations about funding. I know throughout the state, payment to those conflict attorneys are kind of all over the place. In Mercer County, that attorney who does get a conflict case gets paid a flat fee of $500. That is regardless of the outcome of the case. I can say if it is a homicide, they do get paid $150 an hour. Homicides are not super common in our county. Those fee amounts, there's really no oversight throughout the state on what is considered a reasonable fee, which is what the ABA suggests happen, a reasonable fee, and they get paid in a timely manner. Obviously, the issue with that payment structure would discourage lawyers from hopefully would discourage them from providing a robust defense. If you can get $500 for pleading something at the magistrate level and or $500 for taking something to trial, you can imagine what the outcome of that tends to be. And I am not saying this, we do have excellent attorneys who do that contract work in our county and do know what they sign up for. However, I did have the chance to overhear one of those attorneys say, "I went out of my contract, I had to go to trial." So that's concerning. That was one issue that I did want to bring up here today that wasn't addressed by anyone else. Again, every county does it different. It's hard to kind of pinpoint how things go, but that's definitely part of the issue in our indigent defense as we move forward to making things better. So we did talk a lot about today, obviously we're talking about criminal adult cases that are done. There was a little bit of mention that we also do juvenile cases. In Pennsylvania, all juveniles are considered indigent. So unless you have a juvenile in a family, we do not consider the family's means of whether or not they can afford our services. So we do, I would say, probably 98% of all juvenile cases in our county. But there are certain counties that have more than just criminal and juvenile cases to deal with, and it was mentioned a little bit in one of the presentations. The counties that house state facilities, state prisons. Mercer County is one of them. We have SCI Mercer in Mercer County. We also are responsible for representing any inmate in that county or in that jail who is up for a parole violation. And so that requires a whole separate set of skills, understanding the law there. And it does help because those do intersect with our other criminal cases. But we also are the ones that, from that state facility, receiving letters every day from inmates. And it's typically something we cannot assist them with, but that still is time that is taken that typically I'm the one answering those questions for. But I believe there are 24 state correctional facilities throughout the state. There are some counties that house 2 of those facilities and are responsible for representing inmates in 2 facilities who are facing state parole violations. When our clients, after we would hope we were done with them, come back because they have failed to make payments, they've failed to pay their court costs, their fines, restitution. I would say in our county we probably have 5 or 6 people picked up on bench warrants that are placed on our schedule every day. And those cases, if we had the time to do some mitigation, find out what's going on in their situation, we probably would be able to stop and even avoid the bench warrants in general. No one has really taken the time, other than our office, to really look at how much they're paying to place this person in, to incarcerate them, than to have a little more understanding of things that are going on in their lives. Of course, no one's going to get that information or cares about that information other than our office, and we just simply do not have the time to be able to present that to the courts. And it's already been talked about as far as what those collateral consequences are for people's lives. In our county, we are also doing domestic relation cases. So if somebody has failed to pay their child support and are facing jail time, we are going to every single one of those hearings. Again, very to little investigation of those done, and although the system is set up that if a person actually shows, they typically don't go to jail, but if they don't show, there's a bench warrant, and we're going through that whole process again. So that is another area that takes a lot of time in our offices. And it was also mentioned that we do mental health and voluntary commitments. Our county does have a psych unit, so if you're a lucky county that has a psych unit, you get to do those hearings. We do those twice a week. There could be 6 to 7, 8, up to 10 people a week that we are doing involuntary commitment hearings for. Again, a whole different set of laws and procedure that the attorney must be aware of. And we are given little, and the rules do allow us to have independent psych evaluations. We don't have the resources or the time to be able to do that. Monthly, we are also dealing with any Mercer County person who is placed in one of the state hospitals, Warren State Hospital or Norristown. A lot of the criminal cases that we are seeing are a result of mental health issues. As Julia said, I do consider myself a social worker, and honestly, I have dubbed myself the mental health expert in Mercer County because everyone calls me when there is a question. I don't know if there's some sort of amnesia that goes on, but they're usually the bench, district attorney, the jail, everyone calls our office. We have to explain, this is how it happens. This is, you can't do it this way, you can't do it that way. It's an over and over and over again conversation. What really, really bothers me, and I hope this doesn't happen in other counties, but it does happen in our county. There are, with the way the mental health and the ID system are set up, the intellectual disability system is set up with people living in group homes. They are in the community typically. When group home individuals are having behaviors and or assault staff workers and the police are called, it is very often that those individuals are placed in our county jail. To me, on its face, seems so obvious that we shouldn't even be having these conversations, but I'm having to explain to police, to district attorneys, to judges, why this person is not competent to stand trial. Why are we wasting our resources? Why are we wasting our time? I don't have the resources. I don't know where this person is going to live. I will say the biggest question is, well, where are they going to go? And my answer typically is, I don't know. But these are the things that we lose sleep over. These are the things that we fret about. And it just seems so on its face unjust that it takes away from your time with the clients who really do need the help and really can, well, at that point, even there be some kind of service during the criminal justice system. So that is one issue that I really wanted to bring up. Social workers are not the norm in the public defender's offices in Pennsylvania. That's what I'm working on, hoping to relieve some of that social work that we have to do. And we are having to be creative in our requests for funding for these sort of roles. So my goal here today was basically, there was a lot said that I agree with totally. I've been in probably most of the situations that were spoke of today. My goal today was basically to just kind of give you a little more glimpse into the world of public defense. With a majority of court cases that we do in general in our state, and most of those are criminal, and a majority of those cases also being people too poor to hire counsel. Indigent defense isn't just part of our criminal justice system. I would suggest that it is our criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We're going to wrap it up with some thoughts as well, but thank you so much. Rep. Kincaid, closing thoughts.
I think, this was an important conversation, and what's sad is I don't think that anything new was shared in the sense that, to Veronica's point, we've known this. We've known this for decades, and the fact that we have failed to do anything about it is criminal. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that our system functions effectively. It's inexcusable to leave our system the way that it is because people are entitled to a defense. And one of the things that I love about the Gideon case, my favorite fact about it is that after going through the entire process pro se, when he got to the Supreme Court, the first thing that the Supreme Court did after taking the case was appoint him counsel. And I think that is, the whole point of it. Our justices recognize that the average person is not sophisticated enough to navigate our criminal justice system, and that the idea that we would allow them to do that is not in the service of justice. So I don't know how we're going to fix it. I think that this court case is a really important step. I think it mirrors the court case that held us accountable for failing to constitutionally fund our schools. And you want to talk about things being interconnected, not funding our schools leads to needing to fund our criminal justice system. So, I think that is a critical piece. But the thing that we also ran into is that even though we have this court case that says we're not constitutionally funding our schools, we're still battling to be able to constitutionally fund our schools. So I hope that we can do more because we need to be doing more.
Thank you, Rep. Let me say a couple thanks, and then I want to be sure to hit my comments as well. I want to thank, of course, all of our speakers who came from far to help us today. For those of you who don't know as well, everything is being recorded. We have worked with Chairman Briggs and the Judiciary Committee to make sure that this was going to occur and this information would be shared, and we're going to hopefully use it as more of a discussion point going forward into the next term and looking forward to the next budget as well. So we definitely appreciate all the speakers who made the effort to come out here. I want to thank, in particular, Rep. Kincaid, of course, because she's always caring about these issues, so I love having her here with it. But County Executive Innamorato, who made special time to come up here and put a face onto the actual challenges that counties fiscally are dealing when the state pushes its obligation off. That's one of the points, too, that kind of struck me. And like I think Rob had mentioned, there's so many notes I was trying to take as we went through. And what sometimes we come across in Harrisburg is this idea of local control. And we hear this often. And it doesn't mean what I guess I thought it meant. Right. So often when we hear local control being brought up in Harrisburg, it usually just means dump the cost on the counties. Okay. And so when you take the local control mentality of in relation to courts in general, in some ways, or jails, or public defender cost, then put in just the right amount of inadequate funding, you have an erosion in trust and dissolution of constitutional rights in the process. And then you shake that up and just spread it all over Pennsylvania, and then you have public defenders trying to figure out how to get their clients arrested in a different county so that maybe they can have access to the services that would help them never come back. And that's where we are. Somebody had mentioned decades of neglect. One of the challenges that come up is, I think, is if people talk about criminal justice reform or something else along this line, and they talk about the system being broken, and to be honest, what we often talk about is that the system isn't broken. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do or allowed to fail. One or the other, or a combination of the two. From that now is so much that we have learned, and so much that we're aware that we need to do better, but yet the political will is still difficult to see a rise in Harrisburg that allows for situations like this to be addressed. And look, we are still the fifth largest state in the union. We should be doing bigger things and better things. And I'm very glad to hear Michigan figured out some things. That's fantastic. But I don't think we need to be Michigan. I think we can be better than Michigan, no offense. So these are things here that we need to take as legislators and then hopefully build off of in our arguments and debates that we have in the floor of the House. Look, like we said, and like I think all of our people here recognize, these discussions are not meant to be to the detriment of anybody or anyone on the prosecution side. It's not the question to say that you have to take money out of the prosecution side to fund the defense side. What we're saying is that both sides need to work in order for a system of justice to be what it should be in this country and what people need it to be in relation to the challenges of today. And that's where we are. So the support of our indigent defense system should be something that should be uniting not just public defenders, but should be something that is supported by every district attorney and every prosecutor that's in the Commonwealth today. Because if you believe in your work as a prosecutor, then you must believe in the work of the defense counsel. Because without it, then all you're doing is allowing a system of decay, not justice. And that is our greatest challenge, I think, that we have to address. So I want to thank everybody again for spending time with us today. We're going to continue to work on this. Look for us to hopefully find a way to impact a public dialogue. The next step financially that you'll see will be Governor Shapiro will have a budget address. I think it's early February. Sounds right? It's my birthday? Yeah, somewhere around my birthday if you're following. And so we will look to see his line item. And again, thank you for Governor Shapiro and Lieutenant Governor Davis for moving the ball on this issue. And keep in mind, by the way, that's a former Attorney General who advanced this issue. That shows exactly what we're saying, is that every prosecutor should be supporting these types of discussions and this type of funding to make the system whole for everyone to find justice. So thank you for everybody for joining us today, and appreciate everybody who followed along watching as well. Thank you.